Hey there and welcome back to the Code Wrinkles channel for a brand new video. As promised, in this video we will talk about how to use the HTTP context in Blazor Server applications the right way. Because, well, indeed, when it comes to Blazor, there is a right way on working with HTTP context in Blazor Server applications. And there are a lot of reasons why this is actually true. And therefore, we really have a right way to do that. And we could have serious security problems if we actually don't follow this right way of working with this type of information. But in order to really understand why that's actually so different in Blazor, we actually have to also get a little bit of theory going. Now, Blazor server applications, they live in server memory. What this actually means is that there are multiple apps actually hosted within the same process for each app session at the same time. Or in other words, I could be a user that I'm trying to access a Blazor server application, but in that same instance, or maybe just a few milliseconds apart, another user tries to access a Blazor server application, and then a third user tries to do that, and maybe 10 or 100 or maybe even 1,000 users actually try to access a Blazor server application almost actually at the same time. So what that actually means is that what Blazor does, it will construct for each of the requests what is called a circuit, and this circuit actually gets its own scoped or a scoped dependency injection container just for that specific circuit. Now, this means that scope services will only be available or will be constructed and injected once in each circuit that has been started. Now, this actually brings also some other very important problems because due to all the things that we have said previously, we cannot actually use the HTTP context within a Blazor server application. And the reason why we can't do that is that Blazor server applications, as we see from the way that they are constructed and the way that are running, they are actually working outside the context of the regular ASP.NET Core request pipeline. So therefore, it means that the HTTP context is not guaranteed to be available within a certain session maybe, or if it is available, it is not guaranteed to hold the exact context that was there when that specific session actually was created. So let's get back at this example that we had previously. So I start actually, or I make a request to load a Blazor server application, and maybe there are some async stuff going when this application starts up, and when the first component gets rendered. And in the meantime, maybe some other 10 or 100 users try to actually also load that exact same Blazor server application. So each of us will get actually a different session, or well, a different circuit, and we would have our scope services that would be scoped only for our circuit. But if in one of my components, I try to access the HTTP context, now it could be that this is the HTTP context for the user 10 or user 1000 that actually tried, because that would be the HTTP context that is actually available at that specific place. And you can actually understand, I guess, from that working with this type of information the wrong way could actually bring us in with a lot of security vulnerabilities, and that's for sure something that we don't want to have. And I know that this might have been already a little bit too theoretically, but as I always try to actually do here on this channel, I try to also explain things in a very, very simple way, or in the simplest way possible. And in order to actually explain this kind of like startup and how things happen here in Blazor, we have here a very standard Blazor server template with individual authentication, but I really haven't configured anything within the individual authentication part. So it's out of the box as it comes actually from the Blazor server template, because that's not really something that we want to concentrate upon right now. However, to understand how this process works, or which are the exact steps that actually create a Blazor server application with which we as users can interact, we can simply just maybe put some breakpoints and analyze the order in which those breakpoints get hit when we load an application for the first time. So I would start here from top in this pages folder. We have this host.cshtml. And this is actually the main host file. So when you are making a request for your homepage, actually what happens is that this host.cshtml is used. And in this host.cshtml, we see that we actually render a Blazor component, which is the app.razor component, which is the main Blazor application bootstrapper, let's say. So this is where the entire Blazor magic starts in this app component. And we will look into the app component just in a few seconds from now. However, I would like to actually place a breakpoint here. Of course, here we're just assigning the layout, but we are really not really interested in that. We just need here this as a place to actually get us a breakpoint to see and to evaluate when this breakpoint will be hit and when not. And then logical, as we here in this host, we actually try to render this component app. Let's go to the app.razor file, and here we have this app.razor as it is out of the box, but I have added only this very small code snippet with the override to on initialized. And the reason why I did that, at least for now, is just to be able to place a breakpoint here and make sure that we are able to actually get notified by the fact that the execution of the application will stop at this breakpoint whenever this app component will get initialized. And that's why we did that. So in the index, which is actually the homepage component, we have done exactly the same. So it's the standard index template plus this override for the onInitialized method where we can actually place this breakpoint. So these are the three major parts that are of very high interest when it comes on how Blazor server applications actually work. And once again, I want to start from here. This is actually the main page that actually contains the bootstrapper for the entire Blazor server application. Now, before we execute the application, I just want to give you a brief heads up about what's actually happening here. Now, the idea is that when you make a request for your application, assuming that your application or can be found at this URL or at really the host itself, it means that actually when this part or this page actually gets called, that will be inside the context of the regular ASP.NET Core request pipeline. Because what it happens is that a request comes in, then ASP.NET Core, tries to actually find something that can be rendered. And ASP.NET Core in this case will find this host.cshtml file and will say, okay, that's the file. This is what we want to render. Now, in that file, actually, what happens is that we have this component here, tag, that actually adds a new Blazor component, which is the app.razor, which actually bootstraps starts a Blazor server application itself. So that means that by the time we actually make a request from the browser for the first time to this URL, it means that actually we will get this host.cshtml back. During this process, when we arrive at this line, now this component needs to be rendered. Yeah, and what this means is, okay, we initialize that. But once we initialize that, what does this mean? It means that this is actually the place or the time when a new circuit is created, when a new scope for the DI container is created specifically only for this circuit. And from now on, actually, we have a full-blown Blazor server application with its own scoped DI container for scoped services that will be unique or will have instances that are specific only for that circuit that gets created right in this instance. And of course, we have this index, which is a regular Blazor component, and here there's not really a lot of magic going. Now, let me run this application, and the browser will probably start on the other screen, but as this is really the very barebone Blazor template. I will leave it on the other monitor for now, because what I would like actually to concentrate upon is actually what we hit here. And as we expect, so we make a request to our local host. And ASP.NET Core says, okay, here's a host.cshtml that needs to be rendered. So in this case, the execution actually stopped here where we have some code. So we can place some logic there. Now, if we click on continue, we hit this breakpoint on the app component. And it's exactly as expected, because in the host, we bootstrap the entire Blazor Server application by rendering this app component that we have here. So this means that actually when we are in the host.cshtml, we actually have access to an HTTP context in a secure way, because that one is specifically only for that request that wants actually to render that host CSHTML file. But then when we arrive here, that's actually the place where you already have a DI container or a scoped services that are specific only for this specific circuits, or this is the time when that circuit actually was created. And it means that as we do right now, basically we already stopped here for some longer time as we had this breakpoint here. So maybe some other 10 users try to access the same application at the same time. So if I go one step further, and right now I want here, for instance, in the index to kind of like try to use HttpContext accessor and the HttpContext to get information about user. The thing is that it could be that I will get information from the HTTP context of the request number 10 or 1000 that actually happened in or during this time interval until my execution got here. And this is actually a very, very important security vulnerability. And of course, if we click here, continue, and well, this is, or of course, also because the layout renders, yeah, we have actually executed these methods 2 times. But, and this is a very, very important thing to note. Right now, I will click on the counter. So I clicked on the counter. I can briefly bring it also here on this screen. You see, I have clicked on the counter component. You see that we haven't hit any breakpoint, because at this point, everything happens, as we know, through this Blazor server specific signal R connection. And all the changes that actually need to occur on the DOM are transmitted through this WebSockets connection. And then I click on fetch data, so a different component. And once again, nothing happens, so no other breakpoint was hit. Now I will click on home again, and we see that we did hit here this breakpoint on the onInitialized for the index. But if we click continue, nothing happens afterwards. So you see the idea that when the first request, when the first ever request came in, then as we had this type of regular ASP.NET Core request pipeline, ASP.NET Core tried to render that host CSHTML file. Now that CSHTML file actually then bootstrapped a Blazor Server application, and from that moment, no matter what buttons we click in the Blazor Server application, everything will happen in server memory. And therefore, we don't hit the host.cshtml ever again, unless or until we actually hit the refresh button in the browser. Now, when we hit the refresh button, what it actually happens is that the browser makes an HTTP request. So it's actually the same thing, and we start from scratch. We first go to this host.cshtml. That one tries to bootstrap the app.razor, so we go into the app.razor as a breakpoint, and that one needs to render the index component, and we actually arrive here. And due to the layout, we stop here for 2 more steps, and that would be it. But once again, when you hit the refresh button, that is the point where you have an HTTP request. So once again, you have in that specific moment, until the Blazor application gets bootstrapped, you have a regular ASP.NET Core request pipeline. Okay, so I guess that this might already give us a lot of valuable information about what's actually the problem or the challenges when it comes to actually work with the HTTP context in Blazor Server application. So we can imagine right now probably why it is actually not safe at all to try to simply inject the HTTP context accessor and use the accessor to get the HTTP context in our Blazor Server component. So that is not something that we'll do. So it's totally forbidden. A lot of security problems. It could, the HTTP current accessor, HTTP context accessor might even return something null. So it's totally crazy. You can't really do that. Now the question is, of course, how can we use information from the HTTP context in our Blazor components? Because one very specific and very frequent scenario where we need to do this is regarding user information, where we have logged in users. So I have logged in users. So I need to know maybe their access token, or maybe the claims. I need to know their identity, because based on that information, I need to actually perform some logic in my application. I want to display maybe the username somewhere, or things similar to that, or maybe just to understand what permissions does a certain user have based on some claims maybe. So these are all very valid reasons why we would need actually information from the HTTP context in our Blazor Server application. So the question is that, how do we do that? Now, the answer is that it's actually very easy. It's not complicated. And really, once we get a grasp of this whole type of hosting model for Blazor Server applications that we have just witnessed by going through all these breakpoints, actually it's very easy. And from a barely theoretical perspective, the one thing that we have to do is when we are here in these hosts. So we know by now, also based on our experiment, that when we arrive here, that actually only gets executed when we have a real HTTP request. So when this gets executed, we have access, or we are within the context of a regular ASP.NET Core pipeline or request pipeline. So it means that we need to actually capture the information that we need here and then pass it over to the application once we actually try to render this component. And from the application, of course, we can maybe make it available through a scoped service throughout the entire circuit to all components that they might then actually use that type of information. And the way that we are actually going to do that is very simple. So first of all, we will just add here a new folder, and let's call this, where is new directory here, and let's call this services. Okay, and let's create here a class. So let's add and new folder class interface, and we'll call this class identity information. And that will actually be a service, and it would be a very simple service in this case, just to showcase how we actually need to capture data from the HTTP context and make it available to the Blazor application while or when that application bootstraps. So here we'll have a property, public bool is authenticated, and let's have here a get set, and here we'll have another one, public string, and we'll have the username. Okay, so just two properties, and we'll copy these two properties because right now we'll create another class, and I will not create this class in the services folder, but maybe directly in this project. And let's call this class, and the name, I guess it will be very suggestive, initial application state. So that's actually a class that will help actually to capture the state of the application when actually we have the very first request, so when the application bootstraps for the first time. And we'll be actually able to use this to actually take information from the HTTP context and pass it then over to the Blazor Server application. So we will just copy over these two other properties, and these are virtually the only classes that we need. Now there are things that we need to do. So first of all, let's go back to the host.cshtml, and once again we have witnessed or we have experimented ourselves that here right now in this moment this code actually gets executed only when we have a request. So we are inside of a kind of like the request pipeline. So what we can do here is, for instance, have var state equals new initial application state. So the class that we have just created, and we can say, for instance, state is authenticated equals, and as said, as we are in the regular ASP.NET Core request pipeline, we have access to the HTTP context directly, like we have in controllers or in Blazor pages. It's exactly the same. We have access to this HTTP context, and we can say here that the HTTP context user identity and is authenticated. So that will return us if the user is authenticated or not. And here would have state is not is authenticated, but username equals HTTP context. So exactly the same, user.identity.name. So this is the place where we are sure that we have the correct HTTP context. So what we do is we take the information that we need. In this case, this information, well, we just need 2 pieces of information, but in a regular application, of course, you might need to get here a lot more information from this HTTP context, like the claims, like, I don't know, everything that you have on the context and that you might need in your application. You can capture that state right now when the request comes in, and then make it available as an initial state to the application when the application actually bootstraps. So it means that when we finish the execution of this code block here, we have this state that is fully populated with the information that we actually need. Now, there is one other thing that we will need to do, and this is, let's go in this program.cs class, and in this program.cs class, we'll just add a new service here, builder.services.add_scoped, and here in this scoped we'll add a service of type identity information. It's basically our service class that we have created for that. Now, what it means is that we can inject this this type of service in all our components, and we will have an instance that is guaranteed to be only for our circuit. So it's not shared with other circuits that might live in server memory at the same time. Cool. So we are actually done with that, and the program file is not something that we will have to look into anymore. So the next step is of course, how do we pass this information that we have captured here to this application that we want to render here? And the answer is actually very, very easy, because this is done via a regular parameter, like we do things in Blazor applications. And here, actually, what we will do is we'll create here in this application component public. It will be identity. It will be initial application state, and let's call this initial state. Okay, and we need to decorate this with a parameter attribute. That's the way how we actually pass data from one component to the other. In this case, we'll use this parameter to pass data from our host.cshtml to the application bootstrapper itself. And what we can do here is, in this onInitialized, in this case, we will just say, for instance, here we'll also need to inject our service. Inject identity information. So here we will inject the service. I'm not sure why it's okay. Import missing references. Cool. So, and here, of course, let's give it the name of identity. Of course, this is a service. And once again, since it is code, we will get only one instance of this service per the lifetime of the circuit that was created right now. So it means that what we can do here is we can simply say here, identity, and then username equals to initial state. So this is the initial state that we receive once again from the host, and we'll have here the username, and we can say here identity dot is authenticated equals initial state, dot is authenticated. Okay, so we are cool with that. And this means that as this service will have only this instance for the entire lifetime of our circuit, it means that once we actually do this, when the application is bootstrapped, we have this information available to all components if we just inject this service in those components. Now, before we go to that, there is one other thing that we actually need to do, because this was the setup of this app.razor component to actually allow us to pass in a parameter. So the next thing that we need to do is, of course, go back to our host.cs HTML file. And here in our host.cs HTML file, the only thing that we will do is we'll have here, let's say, param initial state equals, and it will be equal to state. So it should be the state that we have here in our code. Okay, cool. So right now, actually, when we bootstrap this Blazor Server application through this app component, we also pass in this state that we capture here, and this state will arrive in the app.razor actually here, and will assign that to our identity information service. So if we go one step further, this means that right now what we can do is come here in the index and say here inject identity information, and let's call this just identity. Okay, that should be fine. Maybe Alt Enter, import missing statement. And here actually what we need to do right now in the onInitialized async method, we don't actually need anything else. So the only thing that we will do here is let's add some breaks here. And we'll say, for instance, I don't know, maybe we have a paragraph, user is authenticated. And here we will have, for instance, something like, but I guess we don't even need that, identity dot is authenticated. So this will tell us if it is authenticated or not. And let's maybe have another paragraph here, and here we'll have username. And here maybe we'll use something like this, because what we'll want to do, but where exactly is my cursor right now? So what we will like to do here is identity dot username. And if this is null, because if the user is not logged in, I would just like to have a string here and no username available. Okay. And I guess that we right now should be actually good to go. So let's start the application. I'm not sure if I have removed all the breakpoints or not, but let's start the application. And this time I will actually bring the application also on the monitor where we are actually doing the video right now. Only just a few seconds more so that it would be able to start, and we can take a look into this. And you see that already we have this information, like this is false and here is no username available, because I am not logged in right now. So let's try to log in. And here I have already registered the user, which is this one, and I have also a password. All this functionality for registering and login, okay, my password is wrong probably, are provided built-in out of the box by the Blazor Server template with individual authentication. So I haven't done anything to that. So let's try again. Hopefully this time I have the correct password. And indeed, and you see that right now I see that information. And once again, right now I can click on counter, I can click on fetch data, I can come back to home even, and I still see this information. But that information was captured once when the initial request actually came in, and then it is actually provided in that initial application state as a parameter to actually the Blazor app itself when it is bootstrapped. So that's actually happening here. And what this application actually does, or what we do in app.razor, is nothing else than taking in the initial state that we receive from the host, which contains the current, correct, and secure HTTP context information, and we actually assign based on that values to our services that will be available throughout the entire lifetime of that current circuit that we have on this Blazor server application. And that would be it. So that's really the really minimum on how we actually can do that. Of course, in real applications, probably this might get a little bit more complex, but complex because you might have, I don't know, maybe different properties or more properties, or you might want to actually map information from the HTTP context to even different services. But so the complexity comes actually from your business logic or from the logic that you want to implement, not from the Blazor setup itself. The Blazor setup itself remains exactly the same. So as a summary, if you want to use information from the HTTP context in a Blazor server application the right way, the way to do that is to actually go in our host, which is used or through which we pass actually when the initial request comes in. So where we are in the context of a regular ASP.NET Core request, here we can capture the information that we need from the HTTP context, and we then pass it to this app component. This is actually the Blazor server root component. And from here, we can actually take in this initial state that we have, which is the snapshot of the HTTP context, and we can do with it whatever we really want. We don't really care afterwards because we are not working here with the HTTP context anymore. We just received a snapshot of information and we work based on that snapshot. And that's basically it. We can do whatever things we want to actually do with this type of information. You can even have more methods here. So here be creative to create actually the logic that it's required by the requirements of the application itself or the complexity of the application. Now, the important point or the key point is to always think about that when you want information from the HTTP context in a Blazor server application. That's the way to go. So in the host, you capture the information that you want and you pass it as a parameter to your app root component for your Blazor server application. And from that, you can do whatever you want. We have actually assigned information or populated information in a service that we have created previously, which is scoped, that we can then reuse throughout the entire application. So we can have access to that that specific information, and that would be it. If you enjoyed this content, please very much hit the subscribe button if you didn't do that already, of course, and of course also hit the thumbs up button, and most important, just leave a comment if you have any question or if you just want to say something. Please just leave a comment. It's really important to get here a discussion started, because that would even make sure that more people might actually get to see this video, and they will be probably thankful to you. So leaving a comment here actually helps a lot. Of course, you can even also share this content with your peers, with your colleagues, through your social networks, however you might see it actually fit. So feel free to just do that. And yeah, this being said, thank you very much for watching. And until the next time, I wish you the very best.